have to lead out with a little bit of an admission. I have run probably 2,000 games of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in the last decade, and I still have to look up the conditions on a pretty regular basis. They're all so similar, and I just don't want to mess up, and so I refer to them again and again just to make sure that I get it right. So this deep dive into the conditions is as much for my sake as anybody else's. My name is Timothy, though some people do call me Tim, and I run over 300 games of Dungeons & Dragons every year, and because of that, I'm constantly looking to improve my game, and so that's why I'm here, is hopefully to draw from your knowledge so that I can improve my game and share a little bit of my experience to hopefully improve yours. If that's something you're looking for, then don't forget to like and subscribe, especially to the channel. We're looking to try and hit 10,000 subs by the end of the year. It's looking a little bit tight, but if we can make it, then I've got a number of perks for you, including a series of parodies that I'm going to record with my granddaughter, Jay LaBelle, and a one-shot that I'll record and then do analysis in and stuff like that. And of course, we'll throw a party because, you know, who doesn't like a party? For now, though, let's start talking about conditions. The first condition is the blinded condition, which really didn't change much except for the wording. And you'll see this wording change has taken the entirety of the 5th edition Player's Handbook by storm, in that we've tried for even simpler language and much more first-person targeted language, as opposed to the sort of generic of the creature that we were talking about before. Blinded condition. All of the conditions now begin with the, while you have the X condition, you experience the following effects. Obviously, in this case, blinded. Can't see. You can't see and automatically fail any ability check that requires sight. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage, and your attack rolls have disadvantage. Putting these things into the little categories of the can't see and attacks affected in order to try and help us remember the blinded condition is kind of nice, and the wording changes is really just to simplify it, and it certainly makes it more approachable in text to try and remember that this is the player's handbook, not the monster manual. So these are primarily supposed to be being read repeatedly by players that are trying to figure out what's happened to them more so than looking from the monster's point of view. I think that was their intention anyway. It's not a big deal. Essentially, blinded remains the same. Next up, the charmed condition. Often misunderstood as being some form of mind control that completely puts somebody under your sway. The rules for charmed haven't changed a lot, but there is a little bit of a wording change that might have ended some ambiguity. It reads, can't harm the charmer. You can't attack the charmer or target the charmer with damaging abilities or magical effects. And social advantage. The charmer has advantage on any ability check to interact with you socially. Note that charm doesn't actually even change somebody out of a hostile state, meaning that if you put it on somebody who is really, really angry with you, they're still really, really angry with you, though it is much easier for you to use the influence action to try to bring them down to an indifferent stance or a friendly one, thanks to the social advantage section. The can't harm the charmer section is where we've seen a little bit of a change. The 2014 version used the term harmful instead of damaging to determine what a charm target could use against the caster that had charmed them. This more specific word clarifies what's allowed and isn't allowed. For instance, now a charmed foe could cast suggestion upon the creature that charmed it, since it doesn't deal damage and is thus not a damaging effect. Previously, an argument could have been made that it was harmful to force somebody into doing something, and though I think personally I would have squashed that particular argument, the argument is still there in certain edge cases. By clarifying damaging instead of harmful, hopefully that helps us to realize that we're just talking about literal damage that's being dropped. This is just my take on it, though, and it's still not made perfectly clear. What do you think? Next up, the Deafened Condition, which did not undergo any real changes. Can't hear means you can't hear, and automatically fail any ability check that requires hearing. I really miss the old 3rd edition adjustment to Deafened, which made it harder to say words correctly and thus gave you a chance of failing on spellcasting, which I think would have been a great thing to throw back into this. But for now, Deafened is just a simple matter of ruining anybody's chances of making good perception checks against people who are moving quietly out of sight. It is what it is. In the D's section, I had hoped very much when the book came out that I would have been talking about the Dazed Condition, which was playtested in the Unearthed Arcana, but unfortunately didn't make it. Very similar to the Slow spell, the Dazed Condition limited people's action economy and was a great middle ground between the all or nothing of, say, Slow that stopped you from doing anything, or, say, Deafened, which doesn't affect you. Unfortunately, it didn't make it into the book, and while there's been some changes to the more potent conditions, I really feel the missing lack of that middle ground dazed option. But moving on to one of the most changed conditions, let's talk about exhaustion. Formerly, exhaustion had a list of 6 different options as to what happened based on how many levels of exhaustion you'd collected, and you pretty much had to memorize or look up every time to determine what penalties were applied in what order and when you had them. Now, exhaustion has been made much simpler and in ways more impactful and in other ways a little less, so that it just slowly works you down towards the end. It reads like this. Exhaustion levels. This condition is cumulative. Each time you receive it, you gain 1 exhaustion level. You die if your exhaustion level is 6. D20 tests affected. When you make a D20 test, the roll is reduced by 2 times your exhaustion level. Speed reduced. Your speed is reduced by a number of feet equal to 5 times your exhaustion level. Removing exhaustion levels. Finishing a long rest removes 1 of your exhaustion levels. When your exhaustion level reaches 0, the condition ends. In ways, exhaustion is now more impactful than it ever was before. Whereas before, the first level of exhaustion was disadvantage on ability checks, which basically means skill checks. Now, the -2 penalty to D20 tests means a -2 to all attack rolls, saving throws, and ability checks. It's only a -2, one might say, but you didn't get any influence that actually adjusted your attack rolls until you had 3 levels of exhaustion previously. And if you have 3 levels of exhaustion now, you have a -6 on all of those checks, which is statistically even worse than having disadvantage. Also, while you did get your speed adjusted to half at a exhaustion level of 2, you now get your speed slowly, incrementally removed even when you get your first level of it. And that 5 feet does make a difference in a lot of combat encounters and can really feel like you're being slowed and made sluggish by the exhaustion condition. I think it's a big step up in terms of just streamlining the whole thing into something far more easy to remember, and it's going to impact the table a little bit more significantly in a noticeable way, because there's plenty of times when you can avoid making ability checks, and very few times that players will suffer themselves to get more than 1 level of exhaustion if they have anything to say about it. Admittedly, levels 4 and 5 of exhaustion are no longer as deadly and awful as they used to be, where you had a speed of 0 and your hit point maximum was halved, but a -8 or -10 on all of your dice rolls is still pretty stinking terrifying. For now, let's move on to the next condition, frightened. Once again, there's been a little bit of rewording, but no actual change made. Ability checks and attacks are affected. You have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls while the source of fear is within line of sight. You can't approach. You can't willingly move closer to the source of fear. Something that I've often failed to recognize is that the can't approach section, where it says you can't move closer to the source of your fear, and since they're in 2 separate line items, that means that even if you can't see the source of your fear, but you know where they are, then you can't willingly move closer to them. And that's an interesting thing that I need to keep in mind more when I'm using Frightened. And now on to the Grappled Condition, which has seen so many changes that it was definitely worth its own video, and you know what? I did one, so check that out if you got a chance. There's really only one big change to the Grappled Condition, but they moved a lot of the rules for grappling out of the condition and into the grappling summary instead. This is how it reads now. Speed 0. Your speed is 0 and can't increase. Attacks affected. You have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. Movable. The grappler can drag or carry you when it moves, but every foot of movement costs it 1 extra foot unless you are tiny or 2 or more sizes smaller than it. Just as a funny kind of side note, a tiny creature can drag another tiny creature and neither of them are slowed. So be careful if you have any cats trying to drag around other cats, because they're really gonna roll. I don't think she heard me. The big change on grappling is obviously that the attacks are now affected, whereas previously grappling just meant that I had a hold of your sleeve and you could do whatever you wanted as long as you didn't move away from me. Now grappling draws your attention and turns it into sort of a tanking ability, forcing you to either attack the person who's grappling you or to suffer disadvantage on those attack rolls. Players will be able to build around this in order to create tanking characters, though they can no longer stack their chances for grappling quite as ridiculously and awesomely high as they used to be able to. But monsters that have automatic grappling abilities attached to their bite or tentacle or clawing attacks are going to be drastically changed. They're going to now become a tanking subclass of monster, and if you mix and match them with creatures that don't have this ability, it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes the battlefield and the actions of your players. You might have that big crazy creature that's really hard to hit and hurt, and maybe it doesn't deal a lot of damage, and a bunch of tiny little glass cannons, but if that big guy has a built-in grappling effect, he is going to command the attention of people that would rather be destroying the little things that are killing your group. Though it's no longer mentioned in the condition, incapacitation does still end a grapple if the grappler is incapacitated, and though it's now mentioned in the condition and wasn't before, moving with a creature remains unchanged from the previous edition. It just got put into the condition space. That's enough of that. If you want to check out grappling further, go ahead and check out that other video. For now, let's move on to the incapacitated condition. Incapacitated used to simply read that you couldn't take actions or reactions, and so it's now seen quite a number of changes in the conditions text. Inactive. You can't take any action, bonus action, or reaction. No concentration. Your concentration is broken. Speechless. You can't speak. Surprised. If you're incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll. The slight change to the actions portion of this to include bonus actions is really more of a clarification than a change. We did have this in tweet format from Crawford as being the intention of the 2014 incapacitated, but now we have it in writing for 2024. Concentration being broken is not actually a change to the incapacitated condition, but putting in here might actually surprise a bunch of people, because there's been countless numbers of players who haven't realized that incapacitation breaks concentration because it was tucked away in the spellcasting rules instead of in the condition itself back in 2014. One of the bigger changes that's not really that big is that you now can't speak when you're incapacitated. That used to be a function of the abilities that use incapacitated as a rider, like stunned and paralyzed. They would mention how much you could or could not talk. Now, anytime you're incapacitated, you just physically can't, meaning stunned people who used to be able to speak falteringly now can't talk at all. This won't make a huge difference, though anything that stops players from talking smack to their opponents is actually kind of a downside, because it can be fun to hear somebody who's helpless wailing and railing against it while you're beating them down. Maybe I'm just being a little vicious there, though. Finally, having the incapacitated condition meaning that you are surprised and have disadvantage on your initiative rolls is definitely new, because the change to surprise is definitely new. Outside of being unconscious because you're sleeping, I can't really think of a ton of situations where you're going to be incapacitated before rolling initiative, particularly since there's no surprise round, and we're talking about rolling for initiative for the surprise. But if by some horrible fate you happen to be incapacitated when the fight starts, then it's going to suck even more. Sorry about that. For now, on to the invisible condition. Invisible used to refer you to heavily obscured, which then used to refer you back to the condition section for blinded, and to say that that was annoying was not even the half of it. And so having everything more self-contained into the invisible condition is a big win for the 2024 book. They also tied in the rules for stealth into invisibility, which feels like it was just a bit of a mistake, honestly, as a way to avoid adding a hidden condition to the conditions summary. I think personally that was probably in order to maintain the backward compatible goals that the designers had created, but who knows. Regardless, I did a video on the whole stealth thing, and you can check that out if you're interested. Here's how it reads. Surprise! If you're invisible when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. Concealed. You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen unless the effect's creator can somehow see you. Any equipment you are wearing or carrying is also concealed. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have disadvantage, and your attack rolls have advantage. If a creature can somehow see you, you don't gain this benefit against that creature. So, people who aren't seen when a fight starts get advantage on initiative, which seems simple enough, but because of the tie-in with stealth and some other things, it does seem to get a little bit weird in a few situations. For instance, if you're invisible from the hide action, then you maintain that invisibility and thus the advantage on initiative checks until somebody sees you. If any one person sees you, however, you lose the invisible condition and thus lose the surprise. So if any one person can see you, then everybody knows where you are and you don't get to roll with advantage. However, if you're invisible thanks to the invisibility spell and somebody can see you, even if everybody can see you on the entire other team, you still have the invisible condition, and thus you're still able to get advantage on your initiative rolls. Even though you don't get to take advantage on attack rolls or disadvantage against you for those people who can see you, you still get to go before other people in the initiative. And there's really no acceptable justification for it. It doesn't actually make any common sense that I can come up with. If you've got an idea of why that makes sense, please, by all means. Meanwhile, the addition of text about if someone can see you, canceling out the influence, is a solid attempt to provide some common sense opportunity about whether or not you get advantage or disadvantage, instead of the very weird but technically raw as written interactions of the previous edition. Enough about that. Let's move on to the Paralyzed Condition. It's had some wording changes, but basically it's same. Incapacitated. You have the Incapacitated Condition. Speed 0. Your speed is 0 and can't increase. Saving throws affected. You automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Automatic critical hits. Any attack roll that hits you is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of you. Still terrifying. Meanwhile, on to Petrified, which saw wording changes that left one or two odd little questions. You're turned to inanimate substance. You're transformed along with any non-magical objects you're wearing and carrying into a solid inanimate substance, usually stone. Your weight increases by a factor of 10 and you cease aging. Incapacitated. You have the Incapacitated Condition. Speed 0. Your speed is 0 and can't increase. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Saving throws affected. You automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws. Resist damage. You have resistance to all damage. Poison immunity. You have immunity to the poisoned condition. Previously, Petrified included a sentence that told you that you were not aware of your surroundings, and removing that sentence felt a little bit terrifying at first, because it made me think that maybe there was a chance that, 1,000-year-old petrified statues had been aware the entire time that they were turned into stone. Yikes, that's just awful. The fact that you're turned into an inanimate substance, however, probably covers that in the common sense department, but how many people do you know that actually have that? Personally, I'd like to play around with whether or not somebody is aware or unaware of their surroundings, depending upon the situation, because I think that sounds absolutely terrifying. and it can be fun to put terror into things. And there's one other change that's notable. Petrified used to mention also that you're immune to disease, and diseases have been summarily removed from the edition entirely in favor of leaning into poisoned, but it also mentions that you're immune to the poisoned condition, whereas previously it said you were immune to poison. And being immune to the condition, which we'll talk about in a minute, does not mean that you're immune to poison damage, meaning that you're now an inanimate object that can be harmed by contact poison. Admittedly, you've got resistance to it from the previous line item, but it seems a little bit strange. But hey, if you've got a statue that's aware of its surroundings, then maybe somebody could put it out of its misery with a nice smearing of contact poison. I suspect that this particular change was actually a bit of a boo-boo. What do you think? Speaking as we were of poisoned, let's take a look at it. The poisoned condition. Ability checks and attacks affected. You have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. The wording barely even changed on this one. It is exactly the same as it was before. So next up, the prone condition. Restricted movement. Your only movement options are to crawl or to spend an amount of movement equal to half your speed, round down, to right yourself and thereby end the condition. If your speed is 0, you can't right yourself. Attacks affected. You have disadvantage on attack rolls. An attack roll against you has advantage if the attacker is within 5 feet of you. Otherwise, that attack roll has disadvantage. There's pretty much no changes that have been made here, though specifically mentioning that if your speed is 0, you can't right yourself by spending half of your 0 to stand up is probably just a nod to the math impaired, because I assume that this was coming up at 1 or 2 tables here or there, but we always pretty much assumed that if you didn't have any movement, you couldn't spend half of it in order to get upright. That does seem pretty cheesy. But next, the Restrained Condition. Speed 0. Your speed is 0 and can't increase. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage, and your attack rolls have disadvantage. Saving throws affected. You have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. No real changes in this one, just a matter of wording, and it all pretty much makes sense. Here we are at Stunned, which, as you might have guessed from the title and thumbnails, probably had a little bit of a change, but not as much as I would have liked. The Stunned condition is actually one of my least favorite conditions in Dungeons & Dragons, mostly because it takes away player agency and stops them from being able to do things when they are stunned without adding any kind of tension or drama. If somebody's paralyzed, they're in mortal fear for their life because of the automatic critical hits that are coming their way, whereas if they're stunned, they just don't get to do anything. Similarly, when a monster is stunned, especially by a monk spamming 4 stunning strikes in a row until one of them gets past the legendary resistances, trauma, then, the stunned condition just takes away their ability to do anything and brings them into a faster decline towards death, but doesn't provide any sort of increase or chance of change in the tension of the game. It just doesn't feel good in play as much as I would like. It can feel good sometimes, and so definitely it's not a condition not to have, but we use stunned for so many different options in D&D that it feels like it's really, really prevalent, but yet kind of the crappiest option. So I was really hoping the stunned was going to get a significant downgrade. If we didn't see dazed put in, then I would have liked stunned to have been more of a your bell has been rung and you don't fight as effectively, but you can still do something. And they stepped in that direction, but it was only a tiny little twinkle toes step. Here's how it reads. Incapacitated. You have the incapacitated condition. Saving throws affected. You automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Previously, stunned made it so you could only talk haltingly, and so now, because incapacitated covers that, you can't talk at all. But stunned also used to say that you can't move, and since incapacitated doesn't stop you from moving, and stunned now doesn't stop you from moving, you have your full movement available when you are stunned, giving you a tiny piece of your agency back. I personally think that that's an improvement. As the bell-rung fighter staggers away to try to escape to his corner or get behind some allies, at least there's something there. It's an improvement, just maybe not as much of an improvement as I would have liked. The next condition is not actually a condition, but I'm going to include it as if it was, because it feels like that would have been the easy way to do this if we weren't trying to avoid adding to the number of conditions. And that's the surprised condition. If a creature is caught unawares by the start of combat, that creature is surprised, which causes it to have disadvantage on its initiative roll. Unfortunately, caught unawares isn't terribly well defined in the rules, but I love the new surprised condition. I did a video on it because the changes to it just allow so much more agency at the table for both the players and the dungeon master. You still get a solid benefit out of having set up a situation so that you can go first, but it doesn't turn the fight into a complete and utter landslide, and there's possibilities for upset so that there can still be a little bit of tension remaining in what otherwise can turn into a boring slogfest of rolling some dice just to determine if that 5% chance of the boss living through the surprise round and first round of combat is something that's going to happen, so that they can fire off their big powerful move and make a difference. Having surprise this way makes it so much more likely that everybody's going to get to have a chance to act in a battle, which is good for your tension at the table. And having the chance that somebody might have a disadvantaged roll on their initiative and still roll 2 natural 20s is awesome for providing that hope and tension of what might actually happen, taking away the guarantees that you might feel like were already there in the old rules. Sometimes it can be hard to explain why somebody is surprised or not surprised, or why they're going first even though you are the ones who triggered the initiative, but I think that that's a fair price to pay for the improvements that we're getting, and if you work hard enough at it, you can usually come up with some subtle hint that started somebody into the defensive, or you can change the behavior of the surprise target to maybe hear or sense that something is happening but not be able to see their opponents, and so taking a defensive action that will have a big impact on the battle. Just taking the dodge action before everybody wails on you has huge potential. But here we are, finally the last official condition of 2024, and that's the unconscious condition. Inert. You have the incapacitated and prone conditions, and you drop whatever you're holding. When this condition ends, you remain prone. Speed 0. Your speed is 0 and can't increase. Attacks affected. Attack rolls against you have advantage. Saving throws affected. You automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws. Automatic critical hits. Any attack roll that hits you is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of you. Unaware. You're unaware of your surroundings. This has been parsed out into more understandable text, and they've covered any kind of common sense requiring loopholes, but otherwise unconscious remains just as terrifying as it did before and is unchanged from 2014. And that's it. Here we are at the end of the video, which means you've earned yourself some cat videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share this out to somebody who might, like me, have to check their book repeatedly anytime a condition comes up, just because they don't want to make a mistake. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, happy adventuring.
It's not just a box, though. It's a clown box. Joe! We can't see you, buddy. Aha! There he is. We're cooking French toast. Don't mind us.